Rodney, thanks so much for joining us today and for sharing your experience with INCON for our Learning Month. And Rodney is Australian. I'm sure many of you have guessed from his lovely accent. And he is currently flagship events director at the International Gas Union. And in his 25 years, professional life, he has conducted international congresses across 5 continents. And he is managing budgets in excess of 20 million. So I'll hand over to you, Rodney. And if anybody has any questions during Rodney's presentation, feel free to put some questions in chat. And Rodney has told me that he loves difficult questions. So we'll have time at the end of his presentation to go through any questions you may have. So over to you, Rodney.
Very much, and hello everybody, whatever time it is for you. So today we're going to speak about sponsorship, and I'm going to start with, there'll be 3 parts to my presentation. The first one will be about innovations before COVID. And I'm going to talk about things we were doing before March in 2020, because they then became very useful to us. Then there was the opportunities created by COVID, and you'll see that I'm talking about opportunities. Like many of us, I've moved past COVID as being a challenge. Yeah, Tony, you need to speak to me. What's wrong, Tony? Thank you for going on mute, Tony. And then I'm a positive person, so the opportunities created by COVID, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about flexibility for the next unknown. And so that'll be the 3 parts of the presentation. Just a little bit of a snapshot about me. The IGU has 3 international events. Each one is held every 3 years. We're an association of associations. So our national host is the host and the organizer of the events, and our events range from 800 to 10,000 people. You can see some of the stars on that map of the world where I've been responsible for overseeing events. So there were things that we were doing before COVID, and I talk about the limit of the hierarchy of metal. And I don't know about you guys, but if you go back a few years ago, we were going, if you want the satchel, you're taking gold. We sort of welded the item to the benefit, and we started to change our thinking of that. When I say 10 years ago, that's only 3 events. We're in a very long cycle. It takes a long time to make change. And so what we started to do is to transition to a more bespoke or a more made to offer sort of offering. And some of the things that we did were, we have a host. We rotate between countries. So the event that's in Korea next week was in Washington DC. 3 years before that it was in Paris. 3 years before that it was in Kuala Lumpur, and in 3 years' time it'll be in Beijing. So we have a host. So we use the concept of the country rotation to create a host category. And why was that important? As we move around the world, sometimes our host is more corporate, sometimes they're more government, sometimes they're more association. But in particular, what we wanted to do was to make sure we weren't cannibalizing our commercial sponsorships. And we forced ourselves to create benefits for hosts, which were good to them, but didn't weaken our commercial offering. We also introduced the principal and global categories of sponsors because we have quite a number of companies that move with the event around the world. As our event moves around the world, companies reduce or increase their participation depending on if it's their area of influence. But we have quite a big repeat number of corporates, so we introduced these categories. And we decoupled our level recognition benefits from our item benefits. So we decoupled the gold, silver, bronze from the satchel or the pen or the opening ceremony or whatever it happens to be. We intentionally made sure that you didn't have to buy a certain item to get the level. We focused on selling you the level because the level's where the money is. Does that make sense? So we wanted to get you focused on the level. We focused on eyeballs versus items, which is pretty traditional. I use this term because most people are either buying something they want to see or something they want to give. And we created a model of credit points, which I'll refer to in a little bit, so that people had depending on how much money they spent, had flexibility to buy, pick whatever they wanted from the menu. And we found this most engaging, particularly for our major sponsors. They really like that ability to be able to pick from a menu and even create their own benefits. And we gave values to those. And I don't know about what each of you other do, but years ago, we decoupled sponsorship from exhibition. So even if our biggest sponsorships will sell for $750,000. And if you pay $750,000 for a sponsorship, you do not get any exhibition space. If you take our lowest sponsorship, it doesn't include exhibition space. And one of the reasons that we did this, it works in our industry, one of the reasons we did this many years ago is because we came to the observation that people often had a different budget. They saw sponsorship as performing a different role than exhibiting. So we decoupled them to make sure that we weren't weakening our own revenues, and it's proved to be very successful. So what did we achieve through doing that? We broadened and deepened our offering. We really found that by forcing ourselves to move our hosts out and create benefits that did not cannibalize the commercial ones. And we deepened our offering by forcing ourselves to come up with better level benefits for people. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. We offered all of our sponsors, whether you're the highest or the lowest, the pick and mix using credit points. And this has been received it's been received very well. And the other reason that it's very useful to us is when you move an event around the world, some of the things that you can use will change. How you can branding in the room, or how you might do things on site, they differ. But if you can keep the level and the pricing the same, people are just picking different items depending on which country you're in. Bit of an old news story, but we took advantage of the technology changes in the last 10 years or so to move from delivering our benefits from paper to apps. And we forced ourselves to identify new benefits, particularly new level benefits. So everybody who sponsors at the same level gets the same benefits, then they get to choose from the credits. We found this to be really empowering for us, and it forced us to rethink what we did. And we doubled our sponsorship revenue during that time. So the weakest part of our event is delegate revenue. Our sponsorship revenue for this, our major events, moved up from around $2 million to close to $5 million in the space of a couple of events from doing some of these things. So we really found. Now this all happened before COVID. So I'm going to move on a bit. If you've got any questions from that, please put them into the chat room, because I'm going to change my focus a little bit and talk about the second thing that happened. So, I'm going to wrap up with this. So if you look at this here, the key thing to show you is here's the credit points. So what we said is if you took a principal sponsor, I'm sure some of you will be going, my God, they're very large amounts of money, but the principle is the same. Our principal sponsors in Daegu pay $430,000 US. And our globals, and if you're down at bronze, you're paying $60,000 US. But the principles are the same. Everybody who is a principal gets all of these benefits. They also get all of these benefits, but they have 26 credit points to be able to choose what they want. And if I show you this slide, here's an example of how the credit points, this is part of the way through the sales programs about 18 months ago. But you can see that people were picking what they wanted using the credit points that they were entitled to. And even if you were the bronze sponsor, you were still able to pick things from signage or from these levels here. The other thing we found was that if you were at this top level, you could pick things from anywhere below as well. So if you particularly wanted a keynote lunch, you could use 19 credit points to get that as part of your 26. So you could add 19 and 7 and get your 26. And this shopping menu we found was received very well. But I make the other comment, it freed us up to say to people, if there's an idea that you have that we're not offering, tell us what you want. And it was really empowering to help us find out what people were wanting to do. And we would be able to either create a new something and put a value to it. And also we were able to make sure that it didn't it didn't cause or cannibalize our other sponsorships packages, because nothing upsets people more than when you sell the same benefit twice. Okay. So now I'm going to change. This all happened before COVID. Now I'm going to change my focus a little bit. So I don't know if one of the things that the COVID made us do in our thinking was to test what we used to offer in a conference. And the phrase I came up with was, what you used to get was 100% or nothing. If you turned up at the conference, you got everything. If you didn't go to the conference, you got nothing. Now, I don't know, you may be more sophisticated, you may have done something about that prior to COVID, but for us, that was pretty much the mantra of 90 years of our event. If you turned up at the conference, you got everything that was available, but if you didn't turn up at the conference, you got nothing. So then COVID comes along and everybody becomes reactive. The word I hate most in the world is uncertainty. We've had 2 years of uncertainty. Uncertainty is a terrible thing. It's worse than bad news. So we try to change our thinking about how to deal with uncertainty. And we also changed our thinking to 100% or nothing changes to a product for every stakeholder. Now, I'm the first to tell you that our event next week in Korea will not have a product for every stakeholder, but that's because we made a decision to retain it as a face-to-face event. But as a principle, we now think in 3 different ways. What's the product for those who can attend? I'm not talking about necessarily the sponsorship product. I'm talking about the conference product. What's the product for those who can attend? What's the product for those who want to attend but can't? Now, the obvious group of that is people who would like to go to your conference but they can't because of COVID. But it also captures people who always wanted to go to your conference but couldn't because their company had a limit on how many people could go. They didn't have the budget. They had to get permission from their boss. So they had an intent, and we never fulfilled that intent, because if you didn't turn up, you got nothing. So there's an audience of people who want something and we were giving them nothing. And then the third group is those who would never attend. Now, I don't know about you and your industry, but for us, we have strategic delegates, commercial delegates, and technical delegates, and we do very well in the strategic end. But the commercial end is where most of the people are, and that's where we get a low return, because they have lower budgets. They have to jump more hurdles to permission to travel than the commercial and the strategic people. So we also thought about how do we look after those who would never attend. And in our COVID thinking, I really forced our teams to go, this is not an issue of technology. If someone else uses the word hybrid, I will kill them. I hate the word hybrid. Hybrid is a tactic at the best. It's not a strategy and it's not an objective. Virtual is not a strategy or an objective. It's a tactic. So first of all, you decide who your stakeholders are, and then come up with the products you can provide to them, and then use the technology that delivers those products. So, for example, once again, I'm probably telling you things you already know. You can have people come face-to-face. You can have people join live interactive. You can have people join live passive. You can have asynchronous things like podcasts or sessions after the event that people can engage with. But they're always the people buying a different product at a different price. So what does that do? What that does is opens up sponsorship opportunities for people, and it broadens and deepens your audience. And so that we'll start to roll this out in our future events. We have a broader and deeper audience than we could ever reach before. So it creates more options to create sponsorship benefits. Yeah. And it creates opportunities to have flexible sponsorship packages. And for us, that means these are the things that we are thinking in that space. Critically, one of the things I said to our team is you have to put a value on these new audiences. Do not give these things away for nothing. If you have a new audience of people that are going to be part of the event in the future, face-to-face, online, whether it's live or passive, interactive or passive, or after the event in some asynchronous way, make sure you put a value on it. If you don't put the value on it at the beginning, you'll upset people when you put a value on it later on. So you force yourself to put a value on it. We plan to facilitate for uncertainty. As I told you, I hate the word uncertainty. It's my word of the year from last year that I hate so much. But the reality is it's the world we're living in. So if you've got uncertainty, plan to facilitate for it. And we've found we engage with sponsors with options which have flexibility. And I'll speak a bit about that giving a case study example of that in a few minutes. And we include pre-arranged contingencies. So we're talking to people saying, if we're going to deliver the event this way, this is how you'll get the benefits. But if we can't deliver the event this way, or we change how we deliver it, we're already talking to them about how those benefits might change. So it's not a surprise for people. For us, that's doable in the conference space, doable in the sponsorship space, but it's not doable in the exhibition space. You can't run an online exhibition, I don't think at all, but you certainly can't run one for the industry that we're in for what we need to achieve. And the other thing is we've become a big fan on the process of certainty of process versus the certainty of outcome. And Angela and I were speaking at the beginning about how people are making decisions in much shorter timeframes. And building in that flexibility to make those decisions, we've been pushing this idea of certainty of process. So we tell people what we're going to do. We'll be reviewing it at this date. We'll be doing this at this date. And people see what sits ahead so that if something needs to be changed, they see the process when those changes will be discussed, negotiated, or put in place. You just don't dump things on people. And part of what we learned from that was we all became reactive when it came to COVID. But we're shaking ourselves to say, stop being reactive and being proactive and turn what was a problem into an opportunity. That's my comment. So we end up with a certain degree of sponsorship portability, which is how we're looking for our success in the future. So that's some of the things we've done during the COVID process to put ourselves into a better position going forward. And the next thing I want to talk to you about is the third one of my headings, which is this one. I flew from Sydney to London on, I think, the 29th of March, Sydney, Darwin, London. And on the way over, I spent probably, I think we were over Russia for 4 or 5 hours. By the time I came home on the, I think on the 14th of March, the plane went nowhere near that and was wriggling its way around through Southern Europe and the Middle East. And on the 8th of March, we terminated our agreement with our Russian member. Our Russian members were suspended. We've terminated agreement with the Russian member. And this event, which has been 3 years in the planning, normally 2, but COVID made it 3 years in the planning for delivery next year in St. Petersburg, gone. And I found myself sitting in London with a blank piece of paper. And in 6 weeks, we have turned that into this. We are now on these dates in Vancouver in July next year. And I was saying to Angela before we started, because our event has a big exhibition, we normally take exclusive tenancy of a whole building, and we need 11 days tenancy. So to find a venue in the world of the standard that we needed that has LNG industry and gas industry infrastructure happening was a real challenge. But in 6 weeks, we moved from terminating agreement to engaging our Canadian hosts and launching the event in Vancouver. Now, from a sponsorship point of view, here's a couple of things that came from all of those flexibility and portability things I talked about before. So our model of flexibility and portability facilitated our host sponsor change without affecting our other sponsorship packages. Remember, I told you we decoupled the host sponsor benefits from the normal commercial benefits years ago. And this really worked for us here. We didn't have to upset the people who were already having commercial discussions with. We only had to come up with discussions for the new host. And means that in our benefits, our level benefits stay the same. We've only had to change the item benefits and with the credits, and not even all of them. Some of them are still very deliverable because they're event specific. But when it comes to things like branding in the venue or branding in the city, or the great thing in Vancouver is we don't need any shuttle buses because the whole city's walkable. Then we found that it was very simple for us to change our sponsorship model for a complex international event in the space of 6 weeks and create minimum impact on our ongoing commercial sponsors and put in place a host sponsor package, which is still being negotiated, but it will not impact on our, 'cause commercial sponsors in any great way. Okay, so at the end of that process, I've talked to you about three things. I talked about what we did long before COVID. I talked to you about some of the ways we changed our thinking and our processes and took opportunities from COVID to change the way we think. And then I showed you a little case study of how an unknown, nothing to do with COVID, but another unknown in the space of 6 weeks moved us from an event in St. Petersburg in Russia to an event in Vancouver, which will be delivered in 14 months' time. And on that basis, I will say thank you very much for listening. And I will pass you back to Angela, who will start with the tough questions.
Thank you so much, Rodney. That was really a very interesting presentation, and I'm sure there's going to be many questions from around the table. So what I would like to do is offer you the chat function to put in a question there if you're feeling shy. If you are feeling brave and you have your camera turned on, you can just raise your hand or you can put in the emoji for that, and I will take any questions. I'm going to kick off with a question from Jonathan that was about your credit point system, Rodney. And what he asks is, what if all the 7 credit point offerings were taken by higher level sponsors, leaving nothing for bronze? What happens then?
Best problem to have. Very good question, but and the irony of us is we hardly ever. I'll give you a practical answer in a minute. But the irony for us is it's easier to sell a $250,000 sponsorship than a $60,000 sponsorship. We struggle to sell the sponsorships at the bottom level, but we do build in some flexibility in the first part of the process because we don't necessarily release. First of all, we don't necessarily release all of the on-site signage, so that we're able to create some options that might come up later on. And we also we discussed this some time ago and said, well, let's keep a watching brief on it if these things start to disappear. We haven't had to deal with coming up with a contingency plan yet because we haven't been in a position where the people at the top have wanted to take those. They don't necessarily want to take the 7-point items, but the people at the top do want to take the signage items, which often come for 1 to 7 points. So I'm skirting around your issue a little bit by going, it's not a problem we've had to face, but we did have the contingency of keeping some branding and what I would call eyeball items separate so that we're able to feed them into the system later on. The other reason we do that is actually less to do with the people at the bottom and more to do with the people at the top, because it can become very political later that latecomers who are really into branding. One of the things we find is when a CEO of a company or a minister, but usually a CEO, accepts an invitation for a plenary, we often see the sponsorship level crank up or go from nothing to a sponsorship. So we have to have contingencies in the background to protect that, which protects all of the levels of the sponsorship.
Okay, Rodney, thanks a lot. Rodney, I have a question regarding, so what happened during COVID for you all? Did you have virtual conferences? And if so, no. What did you do? What did you do with the sponsorship? How did that work?
Right. Well, it's interesting because if we go back 2 years or 2 and a bit years ago, we were all going, well, the first thing that happened was, do I have a job? I'm sure we all went through that. And some of us may have kept our jobs, some may have lost them and got them back, but that was the first thing. I said to our president's Korean, and we host our World Gas Conference at the end of the 3-year presidency. I said to our president in literally 2 years ago this week, I said to him, you have to make a big decision by November. So it's an important decision, but it's not an urgent decision. And what I did was I went back to our major supply companies, the top 25, I call them, and I said to them, we're not going to make a decision about what we do with the event until the last sensible minute. Now, because our exhibition is so big, the last sensible minute is 6 months out. The major exhibitors need 6 months, nothing to do with their speakers or their delegates or even their sponsorship. They need 6 months because they have to commit to stand design, stand construction, shipping of stands, and that takes 6 months. So we worked out with strong industry support. We got a lot of feedback from the industry to how well they respected the process. So we said to them in May, we're not going to make a decision until November about what we're going to do in 2021 in May. So that was in May 2020. we were talking about the event for May 2021, which is when it should have been held. We made the decision in November of 2020 to postpone our entire portfolio. So not just an event, we had to move the Korean, Chinese, Iranian, Italian, Qatari, and another Canadian event all back 1 year. So what we did was we moved our whole portfolio back 1 year, and that was well received by everybody. And so we did not run any online conference. And someone's got their microphone on.
Yeah, can somebody mute? But from what I can see, everybody looks muted. So what's going on? Oh, I found it.
Okay.
I found it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. You
Gone.
found the offending child. Yeah. So we didn't have to test the model. We went through all sorts of things about do we create interim content online? And what we found was that everybody was running around. We very quickly found, particularly because of our global audience, that running online content was seen to be a gap filler that people didn't want. Because we run the top level event for the industry, which is very strategically driven, we weren't going to be getting the CEOs of the company sitting in on webinars. Does that make sense? So we never did any online content, and the event will be delivered in Daegu in Korea in 2 weeks, and it'll have no online content at all. That was a commercial decision. That was a commercial and an industry relationship decision we made. Okay.
Okay. And then for the conferences going forward, will you have a hybrid element, where you have audiences being able to tune in?
So, good question. So our friends in Vancouver who were sitting on their hands 6 weeks ago minding their own business and are now our hosts, we will all be meeting in London at the end of June and spend 2 days. And one of the key things in that is starting actually with our target audiences, not with whether we will make no decision about how we deliver the content for the event next year until we decide what target audiences we want, what target audiences we can achieve that we have not been able to achieve before. And from that, we will make tactical decisions whether we have any hybrid online content, whether that's live interactive, live passive, or whether we will create content from recorded to be provided to people, particularly in the technical space. That's where the strategic people don't care if it's not live. If you're not doing it face to face and you're not in the room, then we add no value to them. But for the technical people, we may well add value in that space. A little bit around that point, we've also putting in our redraft that we have a 4-day conference. Our plenary on the 4th day, we look like we probably might replace that with a live broadcast of the outcomes. So what we do is we talk to ourselves for 3 days and then we go external on the 4th day. We're doing this in a couple of ways. One is to create something that's important and engaging with the industry in real time after we've come together and had the strategic discussions and created some content. To be perfectly honest, the second reason we're looking at doing it is because we are trying to make the 4th day more powerful. And conferences tend to go downhill from day 1 to day 4. The other thing we're probably going to do is to move our plenary day to day 2 instead of day 1, so that we keep more critical mass across the conference, across the days. But we'll look at we're certainly talking separately about having a live broadcast with a high-level moderator and key people who were part of the discussions over the previous 3 days to create real-time external content, putting the story out to our stakeholders around the world.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I have another question. In the instance, it's from Jessica Ferguson. In the instance of...
Oh, yes. It'll be a tough question then if it's from Jessica.
Yeah, exactly. She got the message, Rodney. In the instance of LNG...
Bloody Australians.
What level of consultancy advice was sought from major sponsors in the decision to move to Vancouver?
Okay, good question. When we decided, the first thing we did with our Russian host was to tell them to suspend all activity. Now, every event has a different personality. Our event has 25 companies that matter. They're our major commercial speakers, partners. They're also our major speakers. And even though I don't normally get into the kitchen of the events, it's my job to hold the hand of the top 25. And I rang them all. First of all, I sent them an email that said, we're postponing, we've stopped all work on this event. We're almost certain we're going to terminate the agreement. I need to have an important conversation with you, but it's not urgent. And overwhelmingly, people came back and said, thank you, that makes sense, stand by. And then I worked my way through the people, and I talked about the options for locations around the world. Now, this was a juggling act because, first of all, you have to find venues that can run it at short notice, that have the tendency. Then we have to layer that with countries that have LNG activity, because if they don't have any LNG activity, there's no context to the event. The third thing is you look at your own circuit of events, and you also look at your competitors. And our major commercial competitor, privately owned event, Gastech, and it will be in Asia next year. And we're in Asia this year. So we made the decision not to include Asia in the mix. Australia did put its hand up, but they didn't make the cut. But we decided not to include Asia because it would make too complicated a marketplace. And I must give credit to all of the following venues because they are all fabulous. I was holding venues in Houston, George R. Brown Centre, in Vancouver at the Convention Centre, in Rotterdam at the Hoy, and in Amsterdam at the Rye. And at one stage we were holding the Perth Convention Centre in Australia as well. So we looked at the geography of it, we looked at the politics of it. And one of the reasons that we went for Vancouver is the phrase that we're using, it's safe and accessible. And it's got a big LNG story happening. So my job is to hold the hands of the majors across. If you run an association event that has a new host each time, you get inconsistency of your product. So one of my jobs is to hold the hand of the top 25 to make sure that those people have a higher level of relationship. And that was one of the first things I did. They were informed about it in real time within hours of us making our decision to suspend and ahead of the decision to postpone, to terminate the agreement. There you go. Happy, Jessica?
Thank you, Rodney.
Right.
Okay,
excellent.
a question from Forrest about the move to Vancouver. How did you balance and satisfy the benefits of local sponsors? Well, I suppose you had to go on.
Yeah, no, sorry, keep going.
You had to let down, obviously, a lot of local sponsors in St. Petersburg.
Yes, well, if I tell a story out of school, our wonderful Russian host committee were so wonderfully inefficient, they hadn't got very far with that, which proved to be a bit of a blessing. When it comes to as we move into Vancouver, there are two LNG facilities. One's called LNG Canada, the other one's called Woodfibre LNG. I met with them. I told them ahead of what was happening. I met with them when I was in Vancouver last week, where we've started the conversations with them about going, you need to think about what matters to you from a host point of view. The good news for us is it doesn't stop us continuing our relationships with our sponsors that move with us all around the world. We might pick up a couple of mid-level sponsorships in addition out of Canada, but really it's those two companies on the West Coast in British Columbia, which are the ones we have to respectfully look after and creatively look after. So what their host engagement might look like could be very different, because in Russia, it was Gazprom. And Gazprom is the world's largest producer of gas. As many people know, the geopolitics of Europe at the moment is all about the issue of Russian gas being sold into Europe. So Gazprom is the biggest gas company in the world. And we have lost them as the host. And now we have literally organisations that would be 1% of the size of Gazprom as our host. But we have the flexibility to give them the status that they need, the opportunity to speak that they need, exposure that they need, which will not cannibalise our commercial sponsorships. So I come from an exhibition industry background rather than a conference background. And one of the things I learned 25 years ago in the exhibition industry is that you don't sell exhibition space. What you sell is business opportunity and trust. And trust is the single most. We all live in a world where you can't pre-deliver a live event. Doesn't matter what you do, you can't pre-deliver it. So you're taking money from people, and we collect all of the money before the doors open. Nobody's allowed to pay afterwards. So we collect all the money, $25 million from the marketplace, and you're saying to people, trust me. And trust is the biggest single thing, and it's the thing I've tried most to develop in my 20 years involving with these events. When it comes to the conference space, the trust is a different thing, but you are still selling trust to a delegate, saying that the product that you will deliver will be diverse and interesting and relevant. And so you're taking the money off the sponsor, and you're taking the money off the exhibitor, and you're taking the money off the delegate before you can deliver the event. So always make trust and respect your two most important things. That's my philosophy.
Thanks, Rodney. Rodney, what about since COVID? Has the exhibition part of your conference, do you think it will change, or has it changed substantially? And also, what are you seeing, say, in other industries? Has it had a big impact on, like, what is the future of exhibition?
It's a good story. So I'm on the board of the Exhibition Event Association of Australia, so I keep my hand in seeing what's happening in Australia and also with my colleagues around the world. I'll answer that in a couple of different parts. I will argue that it's impossible to run a trade show online. You might be able to sell products online, but it's not a trade show. The benefit, the unique selling point for a trade exhibition is not an exhibitor benefit, it's a buyer benefit. And that is, a trade show is the only place you can see, discuss, compare and discuss. You can't do those three things anywhere else using any other technology or any other methodology. Now, we have found the pent-up demand in the exhibition industry in Australia. We've found the pent-up demand for people to come together has been very strong. We also learned a lesson from the GFC back in 2008. Because we run the premier events in each of the sectors that we run, we run the sort of the gold standard world event for the industries, for the events that we run. One of the lessons we learned at the GFC was, first of all, second and third tier events ended up being more effective than first tier events. That was one of the things we learned. The other thing was, we would say to people, if you're going to go to fewer events, then going to the biggest, most diverse, strongest events become more important. So we turned the GFC into a way to say, this is the place you need to spend your money. Now, we started this process for this LNG event in Russia. Our biggest exhibitor was going to, other than Gazprom, our biggest exhibitor was going to be Qatar Energy, and they've moved their 650 square metres from St. Petersburg to Vancouver. Shell's moved their 400 square metres across. In our industry, the booths are not, overwhelmingly, the booths have no product. Now, that's unusual because usually trade shows are about moving product. For us, the booths are often their business office for 4 days. So they'll build meeting rooms, air-conditioned meeting rooms into their booths because there is so much, I call it the efficiency dividend. If you can bring the most important people into a room, you get the efficiency dividend of having multiple back-to-back meetings with your senior people in a short pace of time. But I think if you look more generally at trade shows, there are trade shows that used to be effective and now they're not because the product's become a commodity. I'm old enough to remember when people waited for the annual computer show. Well, no one's going to wait for an annual computer show now. You buy it online. So your product has to have a benefit from being able, people wanting to come and discuss the technology or the usability or some factor of that. And in that space, I think trade shows are very strong. But they come, if you're running trade shows, you need people to travel, and travel might be internationally for some of the trade shows might still be an issue for a while.
Thanks a lot, Rodney. And then what happens if the pandemic suddenly raises its ugly head and you have to cancel in person in Vancouver?
Well, the good news,
Will you go online?
The good news is I've virtually got no hair left, so I've got nothing much left to lose from the top of my head. It's interesting. We have had to change. We did this for the show that's in train that's being delivered next week. We had to change our contracts because you are not covered under force majeure for COVID. I ran the LNG event in Algeria in 2010. I think it was 2010. And many of you might remember the time when the volcano erupted in Iceland and shut down the Northern Hemisphere. We were busy constructing the exhibition. Rosalind McLeod was on site at the time. She made it there. And we more than half our delegates never made it. They got stuck in transit somewhere in the world, never made it. And I remember at the time looking at it and standing there in Algeria and thinking, well, if you're going to have a force majeure, have a big one because you don't have to explain it to anyone. Now, what we do know is, I'm sure everybody else captures the same thing, you can't protect yourself for COVID under force majeure. So we've changed our contracts to change a little bit about the commercial terms of the event. And if we had to cancel the event, we will return people's money minus a small holding fee. Yep. We're not going to convert the event into an online event because we operate in top-level strategic and commercial space, and people need to be face-to-face to do that. And if we can't deliver the face-to-face for them, they don't need us to. They'll do it some other way. Does that make sense? They can do individually online. But we've discovered that people are very supportive of the critical mass of the senior people coming together to discuss strategy and business. So that answers your question, hopefully.
Yeah. Thanks, Rodney. So you wouldn't basically go online; you'd just cancel it.
I would cancel it. Yeah.
And then Jessica has another nice question for you. What is the most popular technological advance you are seeing in exhibition, stand design, visitor engagement post-COVID, virtual reality, etc.?
Yeah, that's very interesting question. It all depends on the industry that you're in. Some industries are early adopters for technology and others are not. I would argue, it's interesting, I would argue you go to, particularly in Australia, so Australia's at the end of the food chain trade show. Does that make sense? Most of the product that's displayed in Australia is manufactured overseas, so it's not a manufacturer's trade show. There are some industries like healthcare that may be different, or mining, for example, but in a lot of cases we're not. I think a lot of exhibitors are particularly inefficient in what they do at any rate. If you look at the top reasons why people want to go to a trade show, they're face-to-face people reasons. Yeah. So if you're going to exhibit at a trade show, you can enhance the participant experience, but that means they're already in the building. Does that make sense? The first goal is to get them to come to the building. And getting them to come to the building, you can. My personal opinion, you can run some shiny things that might want to come. I have a phrase for that, particularly in the conference industry, and that's personal benefit for company money. I make the comment: why do you run a conference in Cairns in Australia? It's not because the audio-visual equipment's better. It's because there's a Great Barrier Reef outside the window. So there are lots of events where the person gets the benefit from the company money. But to me, a trade show will live or die on its ability to bring buyers and sellers together, and trade shows are not exhibitor-driven, they're visitor-driven. You might make your money from the exhibitors, but it's the visitors that generate the business. So, for example, at the World Guest Conference next week, in 2 weeks, we will have a separate trade visitor program. You don't have to be a delegate to go to the exhibition. We understand that the exhibitors are paying money to do business. So you can come to the event. In Korea, that'll be a medium outcome. In Houston, it was a fantastic outcome. In Europe, it's a good outcome. And we'll get hundreds, if not thousands, of trade visitors who come just to do business and never go to the conference. They don't pay anything to attend. They don't pay an attendance fee. They're not a conference delegate. So we understand the difference between, a delegate's not necessarily a buyer. So we're always very sensitive. If you take people's money, you've got to deliver buyers. Which might be slightly quicker to answer to Jessica's.
Rodney, I'm going to ask you the last question because I'm sure you want to get
Certainly.
on with the evening. But what about the value of your conference program then? Like in some ways, if you're saying it's all about the exchange, it's all about business connections, are you not like undervaluing what it is that, you know, your speakers are talking about?
We have. Let me see if I can answer that question. So our event will have call for abstract sessions, which are very weighted towards technical. There are some call for abstract sessions which are commercial. We will have 2 lots of invited speaker sessions. Our top level plenary sessions and our second levels we call current debates, so they tend to be a bit more hands-on. Nobody comes to our event to go to all the sessions, but people come for the bit that matters to their tribe. Everybody belongs to a tribe. And strategic people belong to a different tribe than technical people. One of the challenges we do have is making the worthwhile participation for technical delegates, because as I said before, they have the least independence in their budgets and the more difficulty getting approval by others from their bosses to attend. We tend to find that we don't have a problem with the quality and quantity of our commercial and our strategic delegates, because we deliver that face-to-face, which allows them to have face-to-face meeting, Chatham House rules meeting, coffee conversations, gossip, all the things that you get by putting these people. And we only run our major events once every 3 years. So we're not trying to get the top level people in the room every year.
Okay.
Post-COVID, am I finding it easier to sell sponsorship or harder? Sponsorship held up better than exhibition space in the interim 18 months while we were sitting on our hands for the World Gas Conference, because people felt they could deliver sponsorship with less on the ground obligation. Does that make sense? So in the time of uncertainty, sponsorship held up. Both our exhibition and our sponsorship have held up incredibly well. But sponsorship was probably easier to hold up than exhibition space.
One final question then from Jonathan. Post-COVID, are you finding it easier to sell sponsorship or harder?
Yeah, I think I just saw his question come up and cheated, and I answered that for you. I think this event this year is being delivered under the influence of COVID with systems that were already greatly in place. Our event next year will be looking to diversify the sponsorship, particularly if we make the strategic decision to engage with broader audiences of people who may or may not be able to attend, but still want part of the product we have to offer. So that would probably broaden our sponsorship a bit.
Okay. And are they changing their attitude to branding at all?
Yes, they are. People are sharpening that up a bit. We certainly, but one of the benefits of our model allows us to capture that. We're finding people who are more hard-nosed about their sponsorship. Sponsorship's always been more political than exhibiting. Exhibiting is you buy a space, you do what you want. Sponsorship gets very political, particularly for us. If there are certain countries sponsoring, others will not sponsor because they don't want their logo next to each other. So we have a part of that issue. But people are becoming, remember, these people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on our sponsorship. They're certainly becoming more focused on what they want from sponsorship. And we like that. The hard thing is to sell something when they don't know why they're buying it. And we did go through that at one stage, but we quite like the fact they go, well, tell us what you want to achieve and we'll come back to you, because our model has the flexibility to go, we can deliver what you want by creating these as your credit points. These didn't exist a month ago. And we brought some things into the model for, one of the ones that popped up was the cleaning stations, being a big sponsorship. Didn't exist before COVID, and it's one of the major ones that somebody's taken on site. I think it's not just for your hands, but I think you can sanitize your phone, do all sorts of things out of it as well. So I'm confident. I quite like it when sponsors go, we know what we want to achieve, because it allows us to go, let's come up some ways to achieve that. And I think people have been moving from what I would call being lazy sponsors to being focused sponsors. But so far, it's proved opportunity for us, not a problem.
Okay, super. Thanks so much, Rodney. You have so much
pleasure.
to share. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for your difficult questions. We really had them there, didn't we?